I flew on an Airbus A340. This four-engined wide-body airliner was the backbone of many airlines' long-haul fleets ever since it entered service in 1993. Across its four major variants, 380 A340s were built from 1991 until 2010. Over the past 2 decades or so, with continuous improvements to twin jets, changes in ETOPS regulations, and increasing fuel prices, most A340s have since been retired. Nevertheless, the Lufthansa Group still has a pretty significant number of these among their member airlines. One of those is Swiss leisure airline Edelweiss Air, who flies 5 A340-300s. As it happens, Edelweiss flies to my hometown of Calgary, Alberta, twice weekly from Zurich each summer. They've been flying here for quite a few years now, and their A340s have been a regular sight for us since 2017. Wanting to properly cross off an A340 before they're retired, I found a pretty reasonable Aeroplan redemption from Calgary to Zurich with an onward connection. So, with all that said, I found myself here in Calgary's International Terminal, ready for what was bound to be one of my more interesting transatlantic flights. Edelweiss Air uses one of the common check-in areas on the far east side of the check-in hall, with lots of signage. Now, finding this flight was kinda surprising, since this was the first time I've seen Edelweiss show up on Aeroplan, at least out of Calgary. That said, they seem to be code-sharing with Swiss on this flight, which must be why. That would also explain the Swiss and Lufthansa logos displayed alongside the Edelweiss sign too. Calgary's International Terminal opened to the public for the first time in 2016, and was a much-needed expansion, especially as hometown carrier WestJet has grown. As a result, it can get pretty busy during the afternoons and evenings, especially when you have 5 or 6 WestJet Dreamliners all departing within the same few hours. The terminal is also not so photography friendly, especially with 2 layers of windows in most places, and these blinds on the south-facing side. That is understandable during a hot summer day, but annoys the plane spotter part of me to no end. My plane for tonight's transatlantic flight was soon arriving on runway 35 right, this then 19-year-old Airbus A340-300 registered as Hotel Bravo Juliet Mike Delta. This quadjet was delivered to Swiss International Airlines in October of 2003, then transferred to Edelweiss Air in September 2018, where it's been since. It is also one that I've photographed and filmed here many times over the years, so this felt very cool to finally be able to fly on one. I know from old photos that it's not the only time I've ever flown on an A340, but this is the first time I've flown on one while making these videos. Plus, of all of Calgary's international carriers, what few we have, Edelweiss is arguably the most interesting of them, so I was quite glad to be trying them out. Gate 74 is a short walk from those windows and is where we'd be leaving from tonight. The inbound flight arrived with about a half-hour delay, and our departure had already been pushed back a bit. I had 6 hours to connect in Zurich though, so wasn't too concerned. Boarding eventually began about 45 minutes behind schedule, with the typical sequence starting with business class, status members, families, and then economy class, where I'd be sitting today. Let's go fly on an A340. Edelweiss Air has quite an interesting configuration on their A340s, with a business class cabin behind the second set of doors, and the entire front cabin being extra legroom economy class seats. Edelweiss calls these seats Economy Max, and I got myself seat 8K towards the rear of the cabin. Waiting at every seat was this really nice fabric pillow with Edelweiss flowers on it, and this blanket wrapped in plastic. Economy Max seats offer 4 more inches of legroom than normal economy seats at 34 inches of pitch. That was kind of a necessity for me, and I was quite comfortable here. Even better though is this view out the window looking at those 2 CFM56s hanging off the wing. Surprisingly soon after, the crew called boarding complete, which left me with the ultimate gift on an overnight transatlantic flight: free seats basically all around me. Even so, the back was no doubt pretty full, and the crew said there were 200 passengers and 2 infants. Out of 314 seats on these planes, that's not the highest load ever, but Edelweiss is going up to 3 weekly flights here next year, so clearly Calgary is working for them. These Economy Max seats, however, are not cheap. After booking with Aeroplan, I paid for my seat online through Swiss, and this set me back 149 Swiss francs, or just over 200 Canadian dollars. Before they closed the boarding door, the cabin crew gave out these complimentary earbuds and some wipes too. Also, after looking a bit closer, these really are some very high quality pillowcases.
A very good afternoon, dear guests. welcome on board this flight to Zurich. If you wish to treat yourself to more comfort tonight, then you have the possibility to upgrade to our Economy Max, where there are several seats still available. This for the price of only 149 Swiss francs.
I don't think I've ever heard an airline offer paid upgrades on the plane before. Unsurprisingly, nobody took up that offer. I paid for that well in advance, like I said, purely out of necessity, but I can see why most people wouldn't jump on it.
At the moment there is a thunderstorm overhead Calgary airport. That means the handling had to stop the activity, so our luggage is not yet loaded.
That right there is a pretty typical occurrence in the summer, especially in southern Alberta. While we waited, the doors were closed and the safety video played. The cabin crew also went through the cabin and gave out these cookies. Eventually, the lightning advisory lifted and we were on our way just over an hour behind schedule. Please enjoy this spectacular stormy departure from Calgary and the sound of those 4 CFM56s off of runway 17 left. Well, it's not every day I get to take off from home on a 4-engined widebody. Having said that, it reminds me of all the jokes people make about the A340's climb rate. I can't say I've ever been that low taking off from 17 left before. Now that we're on our way though, I'll take a look around the seat. Starting from the bottom of the seat, there's this very roomy seatback pocket, which also had a couple smaller pockets on the front that could easily fit a water bottle. Above that is this nice bifold tray table that feels very sturdy and also slides out. Further above that is the literature pocket, which had this donation bag, which I guess doubles as an air sickness bag. The safety card for the Airbus A340, and Edelweiss's in-flight magazine, which has lots of well-written articles about their destinations in both German and English. They also had some maps towards the back, and I've always found it interesting that Calgary and Vancouver are their only Canadian destinations. Edelweiss A340s have also made appearances in Montreal, but were operating on behalf of Swiss. At the back of their magazine too was this section with some plane spotter photos. What a genuinely nice touch that is. I've never seen anything like that on any other airline. They also had this duty-free brochure, which, well, immediately tempted me with an A340 model. Unfortunately, I was traveling very light on this trip, so didn't have any room for it, otherwise I 100% would have bought one. Back to the seat though, it's worth noting that there is no in-seat power, with the only power being a USB port underneath the in-flight entertainment screen. The screen itself is pretty big too, and I'll go through the selection when it gets a bit darker outside. You'll also find these coat hooks in between the seats too. The headrests are all surprisingly adjustable as well, with a very large range of positions. Unfortunately, I wasn't quick enough to claim myself a center section of seats to sleep on, but there was still more than enough space for me here. One perk of Economy Max, as Edelweiss says, is that these seats have a greater recline, and they were not kidding. I can honestly say this was very comfortable. It was a typical summer evening on the prairies, which meant a couple of deviations for weather before we continued northeastbound towards Europe. We soon crossed into Saskatchewan with these ever so familiar views of the prairies as our captain updated us on our routing across the Atlantic. Eventually, the dinner service began, with a complimentary drink and this meal tray. This also came with a basket of warm bread for us to choose from. I like this little extra detail they have on the cutlery, which, as it turns out, was the proper metal kind. That is not something I'm used to in economy class, and sure enough, they had the Edelweiss flour on them as well. I later noticed that the cups also had that too. The bread was super soft and delicious, and the butter was actually spreadable. The rest of the meal consisted of this entree, which was a tray of meatballs, mashed potatoes, and vegetables, which also came with this potato salad and a small piece of cake. Those meatballs were super flavorful, as was the sauce. The potato salad was nice and fresh too, and that cake was an excellent way to finish the whole thing off. Overall, just an excellent economy class meal. Nicely done, Edelweiss. Later on, the crew went around the cabin again, offering coffee or tea to everyone. The sun eventually began to set as we crossed into Manitoba and passed over the northern shore of Lake Winnipeg. As for the in-flight entertainment, Edelweiss has this modern system that's very responsive and had plenty to watch. They had the usual selection of movies, TV shows, music, audiobooks, podcasts, and some information about the airline itself, which I always like seeing. It is a bit out of date though, since it mentions their A330, which got transferred to what is now Discover Airlines back in 2021. Lastly, they also have a moving map. This one is not quite as modern as on some other airlines, with a couple different views just cycling through on their own. Honestly, I don't mind this. There is something nostalgic about the 2D map cycling through, and it reminds me a lot of Air Canada's old IFE. Having said that, apparently Whitehorse got renamed at some point. After that, the cabin lights were dimmed, and I settled in as best as I could. To be fair, it wasn't that difficult when I had all the extra pillows around me. With some interesting scenery hopefully to come though, I nodded off for a bit. I woke up briefly over the Hudson Strait between Baffin Island and Quebec, and you could just see some sea ice below. It got a little bumpy again as we approached the west coast of Greenland, which was unfortunately not so visible. I also got a glimpse at the moon rising, and continued to sleep on and off for the next few hours. The crew did come through the cabin a couple times, offering drinks to anyone that was still awake, and I had this cup of apple juice somewhere south of Iceland. As we approached the coast of Ireland, the cabin lights slowly came up again, with these nice red and orange hues all throughout the cabin. Of course, by this point, it was broad daylight outside, but what better way to wake up than with a wing view like this, and the sun shining into the engines. In this front cabin, Edelweiss has 76 Economy Max seats in the A330 and A340s standard 2-4-2 layout. The unusually located business class cabin behind doors L2 and R2 seats 27 passengers in a staggered 1-2-1 and 2-2-1 layout, with 6 rows of seats total over the first half of the wing. The rest of the cabin, which I couldn't quite go see because you can't really walk through business, has 211 seats, also in a 2-4-2 layout, but with a much tighter 30 inches of pitch. Like I mentioned before, that adds up to a total of 314 seats, although one A340 apparently seats 300 instead. This lavatory in the galley between the second set of doors had an above average amount of space here, and they also had some Edelweiss branded soap as well. As we crossed the Irish Sea, the cabin crew offered us some bottles of water. I do have to say, they were super friendly, and although I'm sure the lower passenger count has something to do with it, the extra drinks were certainly appreciated. We got lucky with some beautiful clear skies over the UK, and had a great view of the city of Birmingham. breakfast was served shortly after that, and this came with another meal box, some more slices of bread, apple juice, and a cup of coffee. I really liked the look of these meal boxes, and in there was a small breakfast of apple slices, a quarter of a pancake, and a small tray of what I think was muesli. These apples tasted very fresh, and the pancake was a little dry, but still quite tasty. That muesli was pretty good too, although it was not sealed super well and leaked a bit at some point. The bread was once again super soft, and was made even better by that delicious jam. Though the meal box was a bit small, overall this was honestly a lot more than I expected to get on a leisure carrier. I quickly finished up breakfast though because, luckily enough, those clear skies stuck around over London and we had a beautiful view of Heathrow Airport, central London, and even London City Airport too. We soon left the rest of the UK behind as we approached the English Channel. From here at 39,000 feet, we could easily see the entire channel and had some more excellent views of the famous White Cliffs of Dover plus the town itself. From there, we passed near the town of Dunkirk and made our way across Belgium and encountered this Wizz Air A321neo near Brussels. European airspace is a lot more congested than at home, so there's always the possibility of getting an air-to-air encounter like this. This A321 was heading from London Gatwick to Milan and was 2,000 feet below us. Again, a completely normal occurrence here, but not something I get to see every day. We flew alongside them for a good 10 minutes or so, before turning one more time near Luxembourg and going our separate ways. Practically the whole country of Luxembourg itself was visible as we flew over, including Luxembourg Airport, home to Cargolux's fleet of 747s. Shortly after that, we began our descent, crossing briefly into Germany, France, and joining the arrival into Zurich. The IFE screens then started displaying some connecting flight information as well as our arrival gate, which was genuinely helpful. We passed over the Swiss city of Basel right near the border with France and Germany and enjoyed these views of the Swiss countryside. As enjoyable as this flight was, we soon had to bid farewell to the A340, and here's the arrival into Zurich, landing on runway 14. So that was Edelweiss Air's Airbus A340. That was such a pleasant flight, from the food to the service to just getting to fly on an A340 right from home. Edelweiss actually surprised me quite a bit, given that they're positioned as a leisure carrier. They had a lot to offer in an economy seat of all things. Their economy max seats were pretty nice too, and the extra legroom was absolutely necessary. I would not have enjoyed this as much as I did with 30 inches of pitch in the back. 200 Canadian dollars for extra legroom is still a bit steep, but I would say it was totally worth it for that wing view without having to pay for business. That odd cabin layout definitely has an advantage there. With the news a few months ago that Edelweiss will be replacing these with A350s starting in summer 2025, this was certainly a good time to hop on one of their A340s. There's just something special about four-engined airliners, and like I've said in other videos, in what has seemed like the quad-jet apocalypse over the past few years, this was absolutely a flight worth taking. Also, you know I asked about a flight deck visit once we parked, so a big thank you to our entire crew that day. This is one of those flights I know I'll look back on in a few years and say, I'm glad I didn't miss the chance to fly on an Airbus A340.
Cabin crew, yellow door selectors disarmed, thank you.
Thanks so much for watching this special flight with Edelweiss Air, and I will see you in the next one.